Hey everyone. So if you're out there leading a team, trying to build a company, or even just mapping out your own career, you've probably felt it, right? This nagging sense that the old rules for how the world works just don't quite fit anymore. Well, if that sounds familiar, you're in the right place.
It's the question on everyone's mind. Is everything broken? We hear about unprecedented events and black swans all the time. But what if they're not unprecedented? What if we're just living through a chapter of a story that's been told over and over again, and we just forgot how it goes?
And that's where Ray Dalio comes in. You probably know him as the founder of the massive hedge fund Bridgewater Associates. He spent decades, literally, obsessing over these giant historical patterns. And his big idea is that all this chaos we're feeling, it's not random. It's actually predictable.
Okay, so let's treat this as a strategic briefing. We're going to dive into his incredible book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. We're going to unpack why this framework isn't just some dusty history lesson. It's actually a vital tool for anyone who's trying to plan more than just a year or two out.
So why is this so important right now? Well, according to Dalio's model, we are living in a perfect storm. Seriously. You've got this combination of massive government debt, intense political division at home, and, of course, the rise of a major competitor on the world stage. These three things coming together at once, that, my friends, is a huge turning point in history.
So how does this whole engine of history actually work? Well, at the very heart of Dalio's entire theory is this concept he calls the big cycle.
You can almost think of it like the four seasons. Empires, whether it's the Dutch, the British, or now the Americans, they all seem to go through this cycle. There's a spring of growth, a summer of absolute dominance, an autumn of slow decline, and then a winter of conflict before a whole new order begins. It's a really long pattern, but it's driven by just a few key forces.
Dalio says there are three smaller cycles that are always spinning and pushing history forward. First, there's the money cycle. That's all about credit, debt, and markets. Second, the internal cycle. This is about peace versus conflict inside a country, usually driven by things like wealth gaps. And third, you've got the external cycle. That's peace and conflict between countries. The really critical moments happen when all three of these cycles start to peak around the same time, because that is when the world order really changes.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just a feeling or a vague theory. Dalio makes it tangible. He tracks the health of nations over 500 years of data using these 8 specific metrics. What I found so brilliant here is how he separates them into leading and lagging indicators. For example, things like education and innovation, those are leading indicators. They tell you where things are going. But having the world's reserve currency, that's a lagging indicator. It's one of the very last things an empire loses, often long after the real decline has already set in.
And when you look at the data, this clear life cycle just pops out. Nations rise when they're productive, they're innovative, and they're not drowning in debt. Then they hit their peak, they enjoy the good life. But success? Well, success breeds complacency and excess. At the top, debt skyrockets, the gap between rich and poor widens, and productivity starts to slip. This is what leads to the decline, where the easy fix is always to just print more money, which only fuels more conflict at home and makes you look weak to rising powers.
And to make this even more real, Dalio breaks down that internal social cycle into 6 stages, from, a peaceful, prosperous society all the way to civil war. And where does he place the United States right now? Right here. Stage 5. That number is so important. Stage 5 is the danger zone. It's the point where winning becomes more important than how you play the game, where political opponents start to see each other not as rivals, but as enemies. Now, as an analytical tool, especially from a business school point of view, Dalio's framework is just brilliant. But putting on my professor hat here, I have to say it's not perfect. And for any strategist, understanding its potential blind spots is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so the biggest strength of the model is its rigorous, data-driven approach, especially around debt. Dalio's insight that countries will almost always choose to print money rather than go broke is spot on. But the weakness? Well, critics say it can fall into a determinism trap, kind of downplaying human choice and game-changing technologies. Some also feel it really oversimplifies China's own massive internal risks. And that trying to apply the exact same template to 17th century Holland and 21st century America might be a bit of a stretch.
So, how does this theory actually play out for real companies? Let's get out of the abstract and look at a couple of case studies. A huge success and a pretty big failure, both caught in the middle of these exact cycles.
First, the success story. It's a Dutch company you may have heard of called ASML.
Now, the Dutch Empire is long gone, but ASML has made the Netherlands completely indispensable in the modern world. And how they do it? By focusing like a laser on one of Dalio's most important leading indicators of power, technology and innovation.
Honestly, their strategy was pure genius. They saw the world was shifting from military power to technological power. They didn't try to be the cheapest. They focused on being the only. They cornered the market on EUV lithography, this ridiculously complex technology that you need to make the world's most advanced computer chips. So now, it doesn't matter who the #1 power is, the US or China. Everybody needs ASML.
Okay, now let's flip that and look at HSBC. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation is a perfect, almost tragic example of a company getting absolutely crushed by that external order cycle, the conflict between the old power and the new rising power.
You see, HSBC's entire business model was being the financial bridge between the West and China. They made a fortune in that golden era of globalization. But their strategy had a fatal flaw. It was built on the assumption that that era would last forever. When US-China tensions exploded, HSBC was trapped in the middle, getting squeezed by both sides. The hard lesson here? When the world shifts from cooperation to confrontation, bridges don't connect people, they get blown up. So, here's the billion-dollar question. How do you avoid being an HSBC and become more like an ASML? How do you actually use this stuff as a leader? Okay, here are 4 practical, cycle-aware strategies you can start thinking about today. First, let's talk about currency in a new way. Dalio's biggest warning is about the slow death of reserve currencies. This is not just about exchange rates. It means you should really think about your exposure to paper money and maybe diversify your company's assets into things that have real, intrinsic value. Things like intellectual property, essential real estate, or critical commodities. Second, use Dalio's Stage 5 diagnosis as a real-world risk management tool. When you're looking at a new market, don't just look at the GDP numbers. Ask yourself, is this country extremely divided politically? Are there huge wealth gaps? Because if it's a Stage 5 country, the risk of sudden new taxes, crazy regulations, or even your assets being seized goes way, way up. You have to price that risk in. Third, here's a really powerful way to think about your global strategy: the 3-bucket approach. Keep one bucket in the incumbent bloc, the US and the West, for stability and rule of law. Have a second bucket in the challenger bloc, China and Southeast Asia, for that high growth. But, and this is the key, build a third bucket in neutral connector countries, places like Singapore, the UAE, or India, that are set up to benefit from the friction between the two big guys. And finally, the biggest takeaway of all: empires fall when they lose their edge, when they're no longer the most competitive. It's the exact same for companies. The single best defense against geopolitical chaos is to be indispensable. Just like ASML, your #1 goal should be creating something so unique and so valuable that the world has to come to you, no matter who's in charge. In the end, you have to think of Dalio's framework as a powerful pair of binoculars, not a crystal ball. It's a huge reminder of this classic quote, because the basic mechanics of debt, power, and human nature, they really don't change all that much. His work forces us to zoom out from the daily noise and see the huge, cyclical shift we're all living through. So, I'll leave you with 2 big questions to chew on. First, could something like generative AI be a true black swan, a technology so powerful that it actually breaks this historical cycle and rewrites all the rules? And second, a bit more practical, how has this new era of global competition already forced you to change how you do business? The cycle is turning. The only question left is, are you ready to turn with it?